Hello and welcome to this live broadcast on the Codesign 16 Challenge. I'm here with Lawrie Phipps, Kerry P and Donna Lanclow, and we should have Simon Thompson joining us a bit later. This session will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it at a later date. And Simon has joined us. Good morning or good afternoon, Simon. And good afternoon, Kerry. So the reason for bringing... There we go. We might have to mute people, I think. I can mute people away, yes. Kerry's crashing things. That was a good start, wasn't it? So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Codesign Challenge live broadcast as we talk about the intelligent campus and the next generation digital learning environments. Those of you who have been following hashtag Codesign16 will know that we've been having tweet chats, discussions, blog posts, and a whole load of other conversations about, what should we do? Lawrie, in terms of kind of the next generation learning environments, why should we care?
Okay, so one of the really interesting things is the way student behaviours have changed over the last 20 years. The way they've got more access to different resources and they're more connected to both their peers, their tutors, and the wider environment around them. Most of the learning environments that were built and that are in use today were built well before that level of access was available. And we're looking to explore, well, if we were building one from scratch now, what would it be? And it's really great to have Kerry here because she's written a post all about this morning. So, maybe we can just sort of jump straight in and talk to Kerry about what she feels about the existing learning environments.
Can you hear? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Kerry.
Hello. I suppose I would say, my post was really around why won't the VLE die? Because we've spent years questioning why we have them, what their purpose is, and we spent years kind of going around the same conversations about what we want them to do, and yet we're kind of still in exactly the same place that we were, when they were invented. Really, nothing really about the VLE has changed hugely. I think Canvas is about the biggest leap that's been made. Obviously, Moodle was a big change in that it was, open source, but really the features and the way that they work is exactly the same as they are now. And I think we would most people would agree that they're pretty divisive things. And what we haven't seen is this revolution that we keep hearing is going to happen in learning technology. I still haven't seen it. All I see is the same things replicating what we do in real life and just putting them online. And I would argue that, our next generation learning environments shouldn't necessarily be looking at what we want them to do, but actually, what is it we want to explore? What is it we want technology to achieve for our students and for our staff? Not just, I want it to have a better discussion board, or, oh, I wish that the integration with Turnitin was better, which is often what technology ends up being sort of boiled down to.
Simon, you wrote a post last week about what your vision for the virtual learning environment might be, which was really interesting and building on a few things that we'd already discussed. What's your thoughts? What's Codesign 16 sparked off for you?
Let me just unmute.
You're unmuted.
Oh, good. Well, for me, it makes me realize, and I've thought about this for a long time, is that why do we keep adding new tools to the toolbox? The idea is that actually, if we think about the relationships that students have outside of university, they've established a very strong sense of digital identity, whether that's right or wrong, before arriving at university, and they're already in places that are digitally focused. Yet when they arrive at university, we ask them to kind of put that all to one side for the purposes of learning and teaching, and we ask them to join yet another kind of box, if you like, of technology, predominantly the VLE LMS. So my view is that we don't need any more technology. What we need is a way to connect existing technologies up more effectively that centers around the student. The idea is that we should have this interrelationship between the technologies that are out there on the web, and much broadly, and the technologies that live inside our institutions. But the student should have choice when to put content in one or the other, and should be able to take content out of each for themselves.
Donna, you've been looking at where students are for the last 5 or 6 years, and you've been focused on student behaviours. Do you have something to add to that discussion about where students are now and where they want to be?
Well, they don't want to be in the VLE. And in my experience, teaching faculty don't really want to be either. They don't see it as a place. It is a bucket of content. It is an administrative task. It is, as Carrie said, the place where we put all of the things that we want to track because we're being told we need to track these things. So the priorities that have coalesced around the VLE have nothing to do with teaching and learning. So it's not any sort of surprise at all that it's frustrating for people who actually care about teaching and learning.
Somebody want to come back on that?
I'm typing a response, but I can say it.
Well, that's sometimes what you have to do with Donna.
And I actually think that some of our staff do want to use the VLE. I think some of our staff do want to have a space that's provided by the institution that they know they can use within the safety net of the university. And they know by using it that they're being protected in some way. And they might not have the digital capabilities to actually be out there more broadly. You know, the ideal scenario is that everyone is digitally capable. We could all set up a domain of one's own hosting environment, and we'd all be running kind of really engaging interactive spaces in WordPress perhaps, but some of our staff just aren't there. So I think some of our staff do value having a VLE space in order to be able to feel as if there's a sense of safety for some of them.
Kerry, you wrote a really good post this morning. What about it? What about what Simon's saying, and how does that relate to what Donna's saying?
I think we have to live with the fact that some people hate it and some people love them. The rest of us just tolerate them. And I think, you know, I mentioned a book by Neil Selwyn about the digitization of the university, and he does talk about the VLE, as Donna has, as a tool of management, as a tool of surveillance to essentially assure the university that staff have done what they're supposed to do. So, you know, we bring in standards, we tell them we have these expectations that they must put their, you know, learning materials up here and you must put this on here, and then, you know, we force them to do lecture capture, for example. And when I read it, I was like, oh no, that's a load of nonsense, surely. But then as I thought more about it, I thought, yeah, what is it why are we asking staff to use this? I think most would probably argue it's so that students have a single place to go to find stuff. But is that because it's easier for us, and it's easier for ICT departments, and it's easier to manage, than because it's actually about what students want and because it's actually about what staff want? And I think we have to sort of take what Donna says and kind of agree with it a little bit, because I don't think students want to use the VLE. If you ask them what they'd want to use, you know, they'd tell you they want to use, you know, Snapchat or, you know, Yik Yak or something, because that's what they use every day. But then again, there's the question as well, you know, what students want to use the right thing to use as well. You know, there is a merit to using the VLE. You know, like as Simon says, the tools, some of the ease, the single platform nature of the VLE is a really big bonus for it. And, you know, it's not an easy question to answer, you know, by any means.
Is it a bonus for the staff, or is it a bonus for the students, the single platform?
Probably for the, you know, I would argue, you know, for the staff, ostensibly.
And is that the teaching staff, or is that the administration?
All of us, you know.
Okay.
Simon is definitely.
I just stitched in there before Donna got there. I think what we have to remember is we also have, universities have a much bigger responsibility for the overall student experience. So, for example, if a member of staff is off ill, and we still, for a long term, and we still want to be able to run, very often the only place we might get access to the materials for the running of that class is through the VLE. So there's a practical reason for why you might want it. But my point is, it doesn't matter actually which platform we use. If we connect them together more effectively, the students can learn to pull content from one to the other and use their preferred space. The idea at the moment is they're disconnected. So we don't have a connected relationship between the VLE and the other spaces that students live in. So if I'm a student and I want to write my assignment in Google Docs, and then I want to push it to the VLE, why can't I do that? And when I get my feedback, why can't I pull my feedback back into the Google Doc? Now, the way that open architecture and open APIs is working, that is technically possible. The only reason it isn't is because it's not being designed in to the outset of the design of those technologies.
Somebody want to come back? James?
And I think we were saying that, you know, what I wrote in my article is exactly what, you know, Simon says. We are held to ransom often by our ICT departments, by our processes, by our infrastructure, by our administration, and often we're pushed to do it a certain way because that's the only way it can be done within, you know, within the institution. We've talked before here about, oh, could we just get rid of the VLE and instead, like Simon says, use all the APIs to just drag stuff in here and there where we need it. And, you know, that's the ideal, is to have an infrastructure where we can just pull what we need to where we need to. But we are just not in that technological place yet. And I would argue, yes, we've got APIs, but they change. You know, the Twitter API changes every 5 minutes, so does the Facebook one. You know, there's a sustainability in the student experience that is also important.
I was going to jump in there and think, do you think we'll ever be there? Because, to be honest, the investment that's made by companies like Google, Twitter, Facebook is so significant that in the educational field, we're never going to come close. And this kind of idea that the VLE can meet and be similar to the functionality and the functions of tools like Twitter and Facebook, I think is just, isn't that just like a, never going to happen, never going to happen.
Okay, Donna just made that comment.
Yeah, remember the comments can't be seen from people. I've just been checking that. So
yeah,
if you could...
that's why I'm writing in there. But I mean, the desire for consistency, the desire for a one-stop shop, the desire for this stuff to be easy. Part of the reason that people want this stuff to be easy is because they're slammed with all this other stuff that they have to do, right? It's not that teaching staff are lazy. It's not that students are lazy. It's that when you hand them another system, you're also handing them some new way of doing stuff that they've never done before, right? So it's not even so much about digital capability, I don't think. It's James's, you know, far earlier point about what are their priorities. Their priorities are not, okay, I'm not going to curse, are not learning another system. Their priorities are doing the work of teaching and learning, right? So this isn't just about what does the tech allow them to do or not allow them to do. They're going to work with a crappy system because they don't have to learn another one. They're going to feel comfortable with it, and not because it's marvelous, and not because they're incapable of learning anything else, but because they simply don't have the time or can't make the time, or however you want to phrase it, to engage with another damn thing. So if what we're concerned about is
I'm going to stop you there, Donna, and bring in Kerry, who's kind of questioning, is there, and Lawrie may want to answer this one as well, which is, it really does bring up the whole question, is does technology actually add anything to teaching and learning? And this kind of concept of a next generation learning environment is probably, well, actually, we don't need one because it doesn't add anything to it. You know, I agree with Donna's making a textual point, which probably none of you can see, which is that technology it's so broad, but it's a question, Lawrie, isn't it? Is if the staff don't have the priorities or the inclination or the motivation to start using technology effectively, is the next generation learning environment dead in the water?
I don't know about it being dead in the water. I think Kerry was making some good points around about staff drivers and student motivations, and maybe from the institutional perspective, I don't know, is it dead in the water for us to do that, Kerry? Is it dead? Should we be looking at this?
God, that's a question. I don't think it shouldn't be. I think what we've seen more and more recently is universities pushing more towards the use of technology for teaching. It is seen as a way of being, in quotes, innovative, without ever really explaining what the word innovative means, or, as Donna put earlier, what technology actually is. And actually, when you look at learning technologies, there are actually quite a small number of learning technologies really that are specifically designed and only used for learning. I think we have technology, we're not getting rid of it, we should be using it, but like you always say, and Donna always says, digital is people. It shouldn't be about the technology, it should be about how does that technology facilitate face-to-face live sessions with students and the interaction between staff and students. If it ever gets in the way of that or doesn't in any way enhance it, I kind of see it as being utterly pointless.
Donna, do you want to kind of come in, because you were commenting on that?
No, I'm just agreeing with Carrie, and also there's a strange cat on my deck, which is why I'm looking over here. Every time I'm in a room full of faculty who want to talk about teaching and learning, and you start off by talking about the technology and what buttons you have to push, they stop talking about teaching and learning and start worrying about the technology.
Donna, can I start? I think, Simon, you're just making a very similar point. Do you want to just jump in and just make your point?
Yeah, and you can share the link to this on the blog later. But I think there's a really nice term, and one of the reasons that my role title is Head of Digital Pedagogy is because this is my philosophy is around, and I read this to you directly verbatim from the Hybrid Pedagogy site. It says, digital pedagogy is precisely not about using digital technologies for teaching, and rather about approaching those tools from a critical pedagogical perspective. It is as much about using digital tools thoughtfully as it is about deciding when not to use those digital tools. And I think what we've got into here, we've got into this separation of educational technology and education. And they're not different. They are actually the same. Technology is as fundamentally important as a physical space might be, or as a person might be. And we need to see them as an equal, so that the physical space teaching and the digital space teaching is given enough time for development and implementation as we would do with our face-to-face kind of teaching. And I think what we're in danger of doing is separating EdTech away from education and away from learning, and isolating it into something that happens other people do rather than something that everybody does.
This is why we keep having the same conversations over and over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the structure of organizations has made it so that the people who are working with these systems are not in the same room with the people who are having the teaching and learning conversations, and not in the same room with the people who are buying the systems in the first place, right? So this sort of helpless feeling, why are we still asking about this? I mean, my God, I think Lawrie just rephrased the "is the VLE dead" question. Nobody wants to ask that question.
I did not say the VLE is dead. James Way said the VLE is dead.
It, my friend, you did. And so this is a symptom of organizational problems. This is a symptom of people being alienated from the process of teaching and learning by their organizations and by the technology.
Okay, I think that's quite good, because there's a comment that we've had on the Twitter from Peter Raymonds, who says that new tools always arrive, and therefore technology is always changing, but the reaction of staff is based on kind of the institutional perspective on how they use it. If we think of something like, a new tool comes along and someone says don't use it, or do use it, you must use it, it then becomes that's where it starts maybe getting that resistance in, or maybe that starts where it's getting the adoption in. So we want to talk about teaching and learning, but actually, because technology isn't static, it's constantly changing, is that it keeps trying to hijack the conversation. And one of the questions that I may want to then kind of put to all you here is teaching and learning changing at that same pace, or does it just not change at all?
Well, before we put that to the panel, let's get somebody else in to answer that. Except they haven't joined the call.
Well, welcome to, by the way, I'll just take a quick pause and say welcome to all those who are watching us live on the YouTube. I'm James Clay, and with Lawrie Phipps, Donna Lanclough, Simon Thompson and Kerry Pinney, and we're discussing the next generation learning environments coming up soon. We have Intelligent Campus. This is all part of the GIST Co-Design Challenge. You can comment on this video either using the YouTube, which we're not watching, or through Twitter using the hashtag Codesign16. So welcome to our 7 viewers. Success.
Are you and Lawrie like the new Smashy and Nicey? You've got that real sort of radio patter down.
Neither one of us is nicey.
So yes, that's kind of all throwing you out now, isn't it?
Okay. Well, you were talking about the changing teaching and learning. I mean, Simon, you've been teaching for a very long time. How much have you seen it change?
The process of teaching and learning hasn't fundamentally changed for thousands of years. You know, people, it's a cognitive process, and now whatever model, you know, theoretical model of learning you prescribe to, it's still a relatively cognitive kind of process, and it's a social process as well. And I think what we have to be careful of is that we're not about changing learning and teaching. The process of learning and teaching has happened before technology existed and will happen after whatever we're calling technology now exists anyway. And I think what we have to be mindful of is that the technology is in amongst our real life. Why isn't it in amongst our learning and teaching experiences as much as it is within our real life scenarios?
Somebody want to come back? Dave Cormier.
Wait.
Dave, can you hear me? Okay. No, he's just posted his photograph in there, I think. Okay, so Dave, we've just been asked the question, and I know that you're itching to answer this question. Why isn't technology in amongst our learning and teaching as much as it is amongst our normal lives?
Good morning.
Good morning, Dave.
Okay. I think it's because our learning and teaching isn't normalized the same way that our lives are. I mean, we've managed to turn learning into something that lives in a box, and then we look into that box and we go, well, let's just attach random things to it and expect it to respond, and it doesn't. And then we're surprised. Whereas if you take the learning experience and you say, let's assume for a second that learning is something that we're built to do, something we're designed to do from the ground up through 500,000 years of evolution, if that's the way you believe, or 6,000 years of whatever happened in the Bible, depending on your perspective. But we're hardwired to do it. And if you open that up in that way, then all of a sudden those tools start to make sense. And certainly my experience has been that. When you open up learning experience and you open up the syllabus and you allow students to co-create the curriculum, suddenly all those technologies start to be useful because they're being used to connect people together, not artificially grafted on top of an artificial situation.
So one of the things that we've been asked is whether or not next generation learning technologies need to actually connect people, or whether or not it's the tools that we've got are good enough as they are. What's your opinion? Do we need to sort of think about how we just connect people more widely, or is it something more fundamental?
I think that it depends on, I mean, I hate to ask this question, but it depends on what you mean by learning. It depends on what you mean by education. So if you see education as a primarily normative experience, you're trying to enforce a certain perspective on your society, we are very effective in doing that because they're top-down and they're enforcing tools. We call them learning management systems for a reason. They're about managing learning. This girl, for instance, is in a situation where technologies that are applied are mostly normative technologies. There are ones that she is given, she is meant to follow lockstep in. It makes it easy to collect the data because everybody knows what the right answer is supposed to be. The tools we have now. Still hear me, sweetheart? Do you want to say hi? There's people from all over the world there. You want to say hi to them? Hi. There you go. Whereas, if the purpose of the technologies that were in her classroom were to actually have her learn, then the connective nature of the communications technologies would be absolutely essential because she wouldn't be able to learn on herself. We wouldn't be serving her up a bunch of stale, repetitive memorization processes. she would need to go out and construct her own learning on her own. And that's not something she can do with the technology she's been absorbed to now.
Kerry, you were making a point while Dave was delivering that soliloquy.
Yeah, me and Donna were just having a chin wag about, this whole idea of technology becoming this sort of revolutionary thing, and it's going to change learning and teaching. And I was saying, it's like one of those fallacies that seems to take hold, like digital natives and all of that sort of nonsense that when you actually look at it isn't true at all. And as Dave said, teaching hasn't been changed by it, and necessarily why should it? And it strikes me as one of those questions that technology is taken as being a panacea to all ills. Teaching hasn't become innovative or hasn't changed or whatever they want to call it. So let's stick some technology into it and see if that fixes it and makes it more interesting.
It's not just technology though, is it? I mean, we also talk about the word innovation. We need to be innovative. Innovation is important. Innovation is what will make all the differences. Whereas actually, the dictionary definition of innovation is different. And what I would say is, the kind of self-serve cash checkouts that you have at supermarkets, unexpected item in the bagging area, that's innovation. Doesn't mean it's better. So I think sometimes it's that kind of line of technology is a panacea, as you say, Kerry, but there's also this kind of concept that innovation is the most important thing that we do. He says working for an organization that talks about innovation a lot.
Okay, so who's telling us that innovation is the point of teaching and learning processes? Who's telling us that the thing that signals that we're doing it right is that it's shiny and new and fantastic? It's not teachers, and it's not students. You can signal that you care about teaching and learning by putting it in a shiny, nice environment, but you could also signal that you care about teaching and learning by paying the people who are doing the teaching. So we're not doing that either. So I think that it's much easier to make administrative arguments for the shiny toy or for the really tricked out VLE, because they don't actually want to spend a lot of money on the people who are engaging in these processes. So again, this is a leadership problem. This isn't even a technology problem. We're having arguments around technology because we're not actually getting to have the arguments that we need to have about what do we value and where are we putting our resources and how are we signaling that we actually mean what we say when we say we want a group of people running this world who are capable of engaging in critical thinking. Because clearly we don't want that either.
Okay. Hold on a second here. No, Lawrie, I'm sorry. I have to stop her rantiness here. All the we's and thems and all the stuff you just presented, to me, they're total, like, they're constructs that you just made up to push your argument here. There is no we teachers. There are lots of teachers who think we should be innovative, and there are lots of administrators who think that slow, concerted, intelligent change is the way that we need to go. The problem is that we've got this narrative that we're fighting. I mean, if we've learned anything in the last 4 days, is that what we're fighting are narratives, are not people, right? And I think that there's this narrative that education is something that needs to be fixed. Audrey Waters would call it the Silicon Valley narrative. I think she's probably at least partially right. But the problem is that we have an entire field that refuses to examine its core assumptions, right? So we're going to innovate in education, but to do what? So a lot of people, I had a conversation with a government official yesterday where he was talking about test scores and how they were improving or not improving or whatever. And my response is simple. What story are we trying to tell? These test scores are just, they're a point in a story. If we're not pushing a story of change towards something, innovation doesn't make sense. As you know, I don't know who that fine gentleman is, but the person who was talking earlier, innovation doesn't mean anything. Innovation to something is what's relevant. So to me, the question here is, if you're going to have a tool, it's tool to what? Don't talk to me about make better learnings or whatever. What is the thing? What is the change we're looking to make in our society? And as I've said, with our fine friends in England a few months ago, and certainly our colleagues to the south a couple days ago, to me, what we're looking for is to do the very thing that Donna says we don't want to do, which is have people be able to interrogate their society. And if a tool for learning is challenging and forces that kind of interrogation in the very process of learning, then to me, the environment all of a sudden starts to teach the lessons that we want it to learn. So if I'm looking at a future tool, I don't want to hear hims and thems and all the rest of this. I want a tool that forces people to create something of themselves, to create an identity of themselves, to interrogate their society, and do that as a group, do that together as a people. There, rant over.
There,
what happens
you,
when you pull me off the couch.
Thank you, Dave. So I think that's quite a nice segue now into thinking about, you there talking about the environment. I mean, I think one of the things, as we said, this whole conversation is a two-part one looking at the next generation digital learning environments, but we're also very interested into understanding where people's perspectives are on the physical environment. And Dave's comments there about how we need to ensure that the environment does all these things. My question to the people here is, how do we ensure that the physical environment does that as well? And is there room for gathering data and information from the physical environment, or even adjusting the physical environment to make those problems, to help solve those? I'm not going to say problems, because Donna will say there are no problems with teaching and learning, but saying that there are, to improve the environment, to improve the physical environment, to enable those kind of conversations, discussions, and learning to take place.
We can say problem now because Donna's had to go, so we can do all of those things now without getting shouted at. So yeah, so we're talking about how we interact with the physical campus, and is there any room in that, right?
Yeah, so we talk about creating a positive digital environment. Where those conversations are we having about creating a positive physical environment in terms of ensuring that the temperature is the right temperature of that room for that particular learning activity? Or do we not worry? Why, for example, are we timetabled into the same session each week, regardless of actually what we want to do? So we're constrained by the physical aspects of that room.
I'll start. We can't afford to separate both. We should see them as equals, and we would equally choose our digital spaces as we would our physical spaces. In both scenarios, the problem we have is restraint and constraint. And so we have constraint and restraint within our physical spaces, and we have constraint and restraint within our digital spaces. And until we can kind of get to grips with this idea that it's flexibility that people want in order to be able to learn and teach the way they want to learn and teach, then we're always going to have these issues around problems we're trying to solve because of the constraints and the restraints that we place on them. So if you're talking about, should we design physical spaces with participants and users in mind? Yes, of course we should, but we need to understand who the users and participants of those spaces are, and I don't think usually we do.
Kerry, you're on a campus-based university. What's your view on this?
I mean, we have a massive issue with space. Just as Simon says, we are constrained by our space, and we are constrained by the flexibility of our spaces. And I would argue that I'm yet to see a university, maybe Northampton, when they've moved and they've done that massive revolution to the way that they teach in their campus. I'm yet to see one that's kind of reconciled the physical space. I think everyone's got that problem. We have traditional teaching spaces, we have lecture theatres, or we have seminar rooms. We don't have anything between. We don't have anything where you can just shift the tables around if you want to kind of rechange the space. And that's partly because of the constraints of space that we have, but also estates expect us to put the chairs back where we found them at the end of a session. We're expected to make sure there's no rubbish left on the tables. We're expected to make sure the tables are back in the right order. We are constrained by a great number of things. And as I'm totally in agreement with Simon about his point that this physical and the online spaces are not different. They have virtually exactly the same problems online as we do here. We are constrained by certain things. I mean, our campus is an odd one as well, because we're split across, across a railway track essentially. So you've got two completely different sides of the tracks as well. Students travelling from one side to the other, can they do that within the 5-minute break between lectures? Stuff like that.
So your campus literally does have a wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah, it literally does, and whichever side you're on is the one that's the other one's the wrong side. But you know, space full stop, whether it's online or on campus, is a massive issue, and we don't, as Simon said, we don't take into consideration who is using that room. It is usually how many people can we fit in that room. You know, so we'd rather fit as many students in as we can than have a room that can only take 20 but allows for a flexible teaching and learning approach.
This goes back to Dave's point about that we're being measured. So he's on about his daughter being measured, and the same way our rooms are measured by numbers in terms of occupancy and percentage of use, and behind that number is no measure of quality. So you could have a room that is 100% occupied, but the experience could be terrible. But from a statistics point of view, it looks great on paper. Or you could have a room that's 1% occupancy, but that 1% experience is the best experience that students have ever had. But that would be a failure in the eyes of some estates directors.
But could we say though that that's because we're not measuring both aspects accurately and combining and linking that data together? So we don't look at, for example, student feedback, success rates, and all those kind of things, and match them to the environments in which they work. I mean, we've had conversations on the Twitter before about this, and people have said, you know, that sometimes the environment doesn't matter. You can still have a great learning experience regardless of the environment. I wonder, though, that if you had a better environment, you could have even a better learning experience. I mean, one of the key things I would point out is how do we define better? But I won't go there because I think that's a discussion.
Oh, no. Yes, no. Sorry, James. Now that I know who you are, we definitely have to go there because that's the whole point. You know, and that's you know, when we talk about the quality of the experience inside the classroom, again, I think we need to take a step past the teachers and ask ourselves the question is, what's this for? Is it actually for quality? Has that ever really been what the educational experience has been for? Is there anything about the way we've built education that suggests that we want the students to have any kind of quality experience? Because I don't see that inside of the structure. What I see is that we want to have students, you know, we want them to sit down, we want them to obey, we want them to understand the societal norms that we want them to get into. We want to brainwash them with a particular version of history. We want to structure our society, and that's what our education system has done. And maybe it should. I don't know that we shouldn't, but certainly that's what we've done. And then I ask myself, if we're looking at an environment, is there any point at which we should even inquire as to what the students want from that environment, if that's the system we have? If what we have is a system that is primarily normative, that's meant to make students, like, so let's say you're learning chemistry. We don't want you in your undergrad to make new chemistry. We want you to understand what the societal norms are in chemistry. That's what we do. And our environments reflect that. Our classrooms reflect that. The occupancy stuff in the classroom, the more people we can fill in there and shove in their head, the better. Because the quality of that experience in terms of students being creative or students having fun, I mean, those are just, they're not things we've ever measured because they're not things we care about, clearly. But if we're going to make a new environment, if we're going to make a new system, if James is going to wiggle his fingers and have something awesome happen, what is that success? If we're all up, if it's 4 years from now and this thing has been built and we're dancing, we're like, "Whee, we won." What just happened to those people having that experience? That's the thing that I don't understand with this whole venture that you guys are on, is I don't know that I've heard what that success looks like. Is it emancipation of the student? Because that almost sounds like, in that case, it would be students just suddenly saying, okay, I'm done with learning. I don't need to do it anymore. I don't need this environment anymore. Are we creating a structure where students are being scaffolded to understand how to work without the system? Or are we trying to build a system that will integrate inside their lives? Like, are we trying to build Facebook that they'll keep with them forever? What's the purpose of what we're trying to get done? Because it's not happiness and it's not quality. Because, I mean, seriously.
So if we step back from that for a minute and just say, Kerry and Simon have just been messaging in the back channel here about actually maybe from our perspective on the co-design challenges, sort of from what do we need out of new generation learning environments, and James, what he's looking about with intelligent campuses, is maybe it's not so much about the quality. It's maybe more about just leveraging better or more efficient practices for students and staff. And Kerry made the point during you speaking there, Dave, about if you ask the students what they want, they'll always say yes to something.
They'll always want faster horses. I know it's a bit of a cliche.
It's a good cliche, though.
I mean, one of the things I think, I think your question there about what our success criteria are, to be honest, I think that's actually one of the whole points of having these discussions and this whole aspect is we don't know. Is it, and sometimes that kind of blue sky thinking, taking everything up to there, but actually then bringing it down to something that actually will do something. And I think, even Donna's earlier point about resourcing, paying people enough and all that, there are those kind of arguments, but actually there are efficiency arguments as well that sometimes come in. And I think one of the things is, I think it was Kerry, no, it's not Kerry, it was Paul Raymond on the Twitter, which I've now lost, but we were talking about learners like to learn where they want to learn. So there's an aspect of providing them for it. And I think one of the things that we talk about the intelligent campus, but having had a few discussions recently, I've started thinking much more about the intelligent city or the intelligent countryside, if you want to say it, which means it's about giving learners much more freedom about how, where, and with whom they collaborate and share and work together with in order to create a much nicer or holistic or more useful learning experience. This idea that we should only have a small number of students in a small room, I think is quite constraining.
I think, James, the intelligent campus is a really interesting, you've just opened that up for me. So I lived in Leeds for a long time, and for me, walking around Leeds and with Simon's students, Leeds Beckett, for example, you would see lots of students interacting with the city. There would be students, if I went for a coffee anywhere in town, there would be students sat learning or just chatting or socializing, whatever it is, but they were very much interacting with their environment, and you would sort of know which university they were from because they also had a strong identity with it. You can't move without seeing a Beckett sweatshirt in Leeds these days. I was lucky enough to go to Prince Edward Island in the summer, and again, that's a real strong campus university as well, I think. But it was much more constrained as it was quite isolated. So I think that there is something about perhaps that environment, about whether or not you're in a small town university or a big city university as well, and about what that means and what the experience means. They're very different experiences.
And I think, going back to Dave's, but if we don't use the word quality, which I agree is a terrible kind of capitalist kind of word, we should be able to understand what we mean by effectiveness and how do we know that it's effective and having some impact. And I think the challenge is that we don't really understand that. You're right, we see it as quality, which is wrong. And what we should be doing is understanding effectiveness and value. And I don't think we've even got that right. So in order for us to be able to create digital and physical spaces, we have to understand how do we know it's effective and how do we know what impact it's going to have.
Interesting. I wonder, in the evaluation process, as you put it, I think I keep going back to Facebook because it's the worst, best thing that was ever made. Everybody hates it. Nobody likes to use it, but everybody's always there. And that's one of the things we've discovered in working with students. I spent the last 2 or 3 years doing a lot of work in student engagement. We discovered really quickly that any system that doesn't have effective notifications is useless. And Facebook has only ever gotten one thing right. They got notifications right. And for some reason it works. So is that success? Or are we looking at engagement? Can we decide that engagement is the kind of effectiveness that we're willing to buy into and say, look, if a system manages to get engagement, then we'll leave everything else to the faculty, instructors, to the students. We'll let them deal with what happens with their engagement. But as long as we get engagement, then we've done the job right. And that's sort of, I have failed at building environments over and over again. And the only times I've succeeded is when I don't build an environment because I'm not very good at building them. But the only measurement I ever feel comfortable with is how much is it happening? And then you can leave whatever effectiveness at the local level. Does that resonate with anybody?
Dave, James asked a question. Did they make notifications successful, or did people just value them?
Did they make notifications successful?
Yeah, in Facebook.
That's what you said. You said they were very successful at doing notifications.
Yeah.
My question was, isn't it more that people actually valued those notifications?
I think that I've been in a number of environments where people would have valued the content had they known it was there. And the problem that they have is that they can't find out that it's happening. And the constant reminders, from a technical perspective, I just mean they technically got notifications right, so that you can't really have the system installed without the notifications working by default. So we've had this argument, and I'm sorry to descend into the technical here, but we've had this argument with, I personally had this argument almost at a screeching level with Martin Dugiamas 2 or 3 times about Moodle and about the fact that they will not do instant notification in the rebuild for 3. And to me, every time you say that to me, I think, oh my God, I'm going to have to go back to Facebook. So I've been in a dozen places where we started evaluating how things are going. And eventually one of the groups of students or one of the groups of faculty goes, we have a Facebook group that we use for that. And then I ask them what they use it for, and they say, because we need to know what's going on, right? And I've seen it, it happened a couple months ago. It was the funniest, it's ever just like that, where I had a student, I teach community college instructors. I do educational technology for the adult learner for community college instructors. And one of the instructors was like, look, I don't even know what to do about the Facebook groups for my course. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, there's a tradition amongst the students that they create a Facebook course for the course, and I don't get invited. So essentially, the students have pulled out of her environment entirely. They're running the course by themselves inside of Facebook, and they won't admit her to the process. And then you start asking the students, and they tell you all the same things over again. Well, how else are we supposed to know what's going on? Somebody did some work, and they let me know about it. And so to me, that's not about the value of the content, because the content's the same in both environments. It's just that Facebook makes it easier to find.
This comes back to my point that I was talking about earlier, but it's not about the box of technology, it's about the connectivity. And why aren't we in a situation where the students like Facebook, they like the fact the way it notifies them? Why can't we put content where we want it to and connect it to that kind of environment? It's technically possible. We know it is because you've got IFTTT that exists for everything else we do in our lives. But just we isolate so much education technology that we don't see how we can build relationships between, like you say, the successes of notifications in Facebook, for example. And
okay, just for those people who are now watching us live, this is James Clay and Lawrie Phipps. We're discussing the GIST Codesign 16 challenges of the intelligent campus and the next generation digital learning environments. We've got Simon Thompson, we've got Kerry Penny, we've got Dave Cormier, we had Donna earlier, so if you can go back and watch the recording. You can go on. So one of the things that we've been following is people have been following the discussion in the video on the Twitter. And I think one of the things is that we've just been talking there about notifications. Kerry, you had something about to say about notifications.
I think I spoke to a group of students on Tuesday about this very question, and I said, and we asked them, okay, well, they didn't even know where their email account was, which is clearly a massive failure on our part. But I said, what notifications do you actually pay any attention to? And they said, well, to be quite honest with you, there's so many different types of notifications from different services that want to email them that actually they just end up becoming white noise. And what we end up having is students missing what they would consider vital information. I think what we consider vital information are two very different things. And you asked a question on Wednesday night in LTHE chat, James, about artificial intelligence and what could artificial intelligence come into education. And I think what is most important about notifications is being able to personalize them. So one of the things you can do on Facebook is you can say, I don't want to hear from this. I don't want to hear from that. Students can't do that necessarily. And some stuff, of course, they shouldn't be able to mute. But personalization of notifications, I think, is a far more important step. and personalization of actually learning materials is a far more important step, perhaps, than anything else about the platform or the environment that the thing sits on.
I think intelligent notifications is something that's certainly of interest to me, because I think, as you say, notifications only really work if they're at the right place at the right time. And there's nothing worse than having an intrusive or unwanted notification. So we're coming towards the end of our discussion. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I'd like to thank our panelists, but I'm going to give them a chance to have a final comment. And we'll start off with Dave in Canada. Dave, final thoughts.
I think that when we look at this, it comes down to what are we trying to do it for. So if what we're trying to do is bring people together and get them seeing difference and learning through an understanding of their community and through like that kind of growing process where we're, you know, structuring learning as something they're going to do for the rest of their lives, that is something that we know how to do. It's something we have effective models for following. If what we're trying to do is impose a normative view of the world and we're trying to brainwash people, that's going to be a very, very different system. So to me, we have to get that out front. We have to have a really clear vision of what world we want to build. Because right now, when I look at the stuff that JISC is doing, I think it's really exciting that you guys are asking this question. We're trying to build the next world. We're trying to build, you know, voters who vote better than they have. So I wish you the best of luck.
You look tired, Dave. What time did you go to bed?
Leonard Cohen died last night. Is a national tragedy here, so we're still a little kerfuffled.
Kerry.
I would say totally agree with what Dave was saying, but I think that, you know, it is that we are asking the wrong question. We are asking the wrong question. It doesn't matter what learning environment is, and in real terms, it doesn't really matter what technology it ends up being. We should be asking what it is we want to achieve. What is it we want technology to help with? What is it we want technology to support, to enhance in learning and teaching? Not what bit of technology it is we should be using, or what it should look like, or what features it should have, because that is a pointless question, and we just go over that year on year.
Simon.
Yes, so we can guess what I'm going to say. Do not build another box of technology. If you build any more technology, that's it. I will remove our university subscription to JISC, whatever we pay. The point is that what we should focus on is the individual people making the choice about the technologies they want to use, and we should build the connectivity to those technologies. We know that technology and digital tools in our lives, Facebook being an example, whether we like it or not, and why don't we make much more effort in connecting what already exists together so it's much more effective for the individual user?
Thanks, Simon. Lawrie.
Yeah, not going to disagree, obviously, with any of the panelists. These are all things that we have to look at, and we all have to sort of bring together. I think one of the big themes that's coming through on my particular co-design challenge is the idea around student and staff behaviors and around how people can be better connected. I'm not going to use the rhizome word, but yeah, how people are actually changing the way they behave and the way they want to connect, and how resources and support pops up, you know, just-in-time learning, just-in-time support, and connectivism and connectivity is what's coming through for me.
I do think that there's an opportunity there, and I may bring this around to technology, of using technology to enable that to happen. So we are putting the focus very much on the connections, putting the focus very much on the experiences and what people want to do, the personalization, but actually using the kind of technical layer underneath in order to facilitate that, to make it happen, and to create new opportunities that may otherwise never happen. I mean, here we are, we're discussing things with people from America, from Canada, and from Lincoln, and Western Supermare, and you know, technology is facilitating this. It doesn't mean we couldn't have had this discussion any other way, but actually it's made it easier, it's made it more efficient, and importantly, people are watching us live on the YouTube, and we'll be able to watch it recorded on the YouTube later. So I think we've got to sometimes remember that it does, if we see technology not as a solution, not as a thing, and not as a box of tricks, but as something that can actually make what we want to do easier, better, faster, more interesting, more engaging, more inclusive, more accessible, I think we're onto a winner there. Yeah. So I think on that point, we'll say thank you very much to our panelists. That's Simon Thompson, Kerry Pinney, Dave Cormier, and Donna Lanklow. We'll put some links in the show notes to this for you to be able to go to it. If you want to continue the conversation, you can use the Twitter with hashtag Codesign16. We're also, there's people talking about it on the Facebook and even on LinkedIn. There's a whole load of web pages. We might do another one of these. We've had a comment that that's very HE, so we might do a bit of an FE one. We've got more tweet chats over the next week. Please join in the conversation. Help us decide where we should go next. Yes, and as Dave said, LinkedIn really, yeah, there are about 3 people on LinkedIn. Lawrie, thanks very much. We'll say goodbye. Okay, and see you all next time.